Hi, this is Mike Sheaffer here at Sheaffer Genealogy. Today we're going to look at death certificates, how I like to go through them methodically and extract all the information and learn the information that you can get out of them. This is actually a first time for me on this one. I've never done this person. I chose it randomly because I felt that I could better relate to this audience if I never saw it before and couldn't give any preconceived, uh, facts on it that you may not know, but I did. This way, we're both, or that we're all going through this, together for the first time. Hopefully, we'll learn something, and maybe I can teach something. I don't know. Well, this is a first for me. This first video I plan on doing, and hopefully, it turns out well, and we can have future videos here on Sheaffer Genealogy. I feel these are going to be informative and tutorial, and hopefully, everybody will like it. So we can start. This is a death certificate of a person who has the same last name. I decided to choose someone that had a similar name with, and that I knew the area that they were from. The only thing I did beforehand was go into the index base uh, on ancestry.com here and just pick out somebody random that was knew where they were from, and I could at least know a little bit about the area. So if we can get started here, we see that his name is John R. Schaefer Jr., and that is in fact does sign it Jr. is a big big key when you're researching a name that can be spelled so many different ways, and to also include his middle name would be big too if he hadn't had the last name or the junior attached to it. So that's always a plus. And the first thing I like to look at when I'm going over a death certificate is the handwriting, whether it's legible. If it's not too legible, then you're not going to be able to get the information. And usually, if it's not legible, it's always seems to be on the medical side of it, the cause of death. And that's, a lot of us are trying to, find out why the person died. And if you do a quick look, this person was kind of young. So, and we do see the handwriting is kind of small, and I can see up here it's small and tight, but it's still somewhat readable, it appears. And we got a typed version, and we got some different handwritings down here. So that's not uncommon to see 2 to 3, sometimes 4 different types of handwriting, because you're going to have a staff member usually fill this part out. We have the signature of the informant, of the funeral director, the registrar, and the doctor himself. So it's not uncommon to see all those different types of handwriting on there. And so seeing 2 to 3 is fairly common. But then the more people you have dealing with it, the more you can have issues too. But in these cases, the person dealing with it has a direct knowledge somehow. You can get some great information out of a death certificate, some of the best information that you will find in your research uh, over a broad time span as well. So, this is always a go-to area for researchers. And back before they had online um, access to these, you would have the obituary, and you would build up to it. You would find out, through an obituary, a name of an ancestor. Go find some information on them. Eventually, find their obituary, and see where they were buried in, and get a date of death and or whatnot, and eventually lead up to ordering a death certificate, which could take weeks to get. And when you finally got it, you were so excited to get the information. And when you open it up, there's times when didn't have any of the parents listed. It would be just blank or just listed as unknown, and a lot of, the birth date would even be wrong, maybe just a year. And so you had some generic information, but not necessarily a lot of information. and then maybe the handwriting for the cause of death wasn't legible, so you're stuck with not even knowing what the cause of death was, or trying to guess at what the cause of death was. So, uh, nowadays you can actually get the death certificate before everything else because of the availability of online services like Ancestry.com. And so we'll get started here. And first thing I like to do is look at the handwriting, see what I'm dealing with, and then I'll go up and write this number down. That's the death certificate. In Pennsylvania, they were usually in the upper right hand corner, and some years they were down in this area, but most of the time they were in the right side. So I always like to write that down. If you get kicked out of your website somehow, or um, you know, if you're at the archives in general, or the health department, or whatever it is in the state that you're at, and you have that number, you just give them that number, and it could just get access it for you. But we'll start off in the. I like to break a certificate down into three. You got the upper section, and then you got the bottom section, which is the left. The left side is the personal, and the right side is the medical. And they do differ from year to year, decade to decade, state to state. So, but Pennsylvania, this was pretty uniform of how they were done in the 40s in general. This was in 1948, so it's pretty general. But as we go, we'll see place of death was in uh, Middlesex Township, Cumberland County, which is outside of Carlisle. And as you see, died at Carlisle Hospital with RD1. And it doesn't say length of stay. So we'll go over to the other, his usual place of residence, which was RD4 in Carlisle. And the rural area, which could be Middlesex Township. Uh, and we see that he died at RD1. In fact, it doesn't say that it was a hospital. Now that I look closer at it, yeah, it doesn't say it was a hospital. So uh, he seemed to, if this is not a typo, uh, he seemed to possibly die outside of where he lived. So that's something we'll keep an eye on. Like I said, I don't know the uh, info on this person, so I'm learning it as you are. Um, we go down to the lower section, and we see that, and we've already looked at his name. He doesn't carry a social security number, which was common. Wasn't mandatory until 1951, I believe, or 53. And usually, if you were in the military or worked for the government, you had a social security at that time. But it's not uncommon not to have one. And his age, or his sex was male. He was white, and he was married. Now that's a big clue. That gives his wife's name. Not all of them really do that. So his wife was Eleanor Barnhart. So now that I know that information, I could go and start looking for information on her. Maybe get a marriage application when they got married, and get the information from that and match it up with the rest of this, and see how accurate this actually is. But we have to assume that it's accurate as we're looking at it, and then as we find the facts later, then we cross-reference and see what was wrong, what was right. And in this case, he was born August 5th, 1926. Made him 21 years, 11 months, 4 days. Young man. What you want to do is, I always, there's online age calculators. You type in the date of death and the day of birth, and this will come out, and hopefully this is correct. And if not, you have to change it. A lot of times the person may have had a birthday later in the year, and the person writing it down didn't account for that, and so you can be off by a year. And then there's just some that are off by several years, and I've seen them as much as 10 years. So it's, the person giving the information only knows what they know. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the fact. So uh, we'll get going down here, and we'll see that uh, he was born. Well, it doesn't say a town. It just says he was born in Pennsylvania. I always like to have a town. This way you can narrow down your search. Um, and his occupation was that of a mechanic, and he worked in a garage. His father was John R. Sheaffer Sr. Well, that's really nice to have that as well. That narrows it down when you're doing that search. And like I said, a lot of these with the name Schaefer, and especially with the name John, they always carried their middle initial when they signed stuff to differentiate themselves. And again, it doesn't give his town of birth either, but it does give it as the state of Pennsylvania, and his mother's name. Same thing, no town. So that kind of makes you kind of disappointed that you can't narrow all this down to a town. But we do know that this all occurred in Carlisle. So, and that's a big name area for the Schaeffers. So I would assume that they're probably from the general area. So, and that's just on my end, since I know the area. Um, and then you look down at the informant, and that's always the key: is who is the informant. And in this case, it looks to be Mrs. John Schaefer. I assume that could be. Look to be junior to me. And if that's the case, that would be his wife, and that could be senior as well. Yes, and then we look at the address. The address is RD1 Carlisle, so uh, that tells us a lot. That whoever this informant was, the wife or the possibly the mother, um, that you know death occurred at that residence. Um, Now I'm really wondering if this is a typo, because if that is his wife, that's not the same residence as this. So is that a typo? Was his wife living elsewhere? Um, we don't know that. An obituary would really help on this issue, and say I'm doing this blind. I don't have an obituary, so I really don't know. But you know, you would have to find out if that's a typo, and if not, if that's another residence where he died. But we do know that if that is his wife, some of this information that would make why the towns aren't listed. But if that's the mother, you would assume that the towns would be listed, at least her town. So I would assume most likely that this was the wife. But again, that what raises questions to me is, why is it RD1 and when he's listed as RD4? So typo, or was there a separation of some sort? That was something that you would have to look into, and that is curious. And then we go down and see the burial information. He was not cremated. I would list it if he was, and he was buried on July 12th, 1948. And since I don't have the obituary, that would tell me that most likely the obituary would have been listed on the July 11th, the day before. So that's a big clue, and that might be something I might want to actually look into, because I am curious about this. I actually could be related to the person, being that they're from that area. Um, and he was buried at Kutz's church cemetery, which I've actually been to, and I have ancestors buried there. And so there is a small case that I could be related. And Lutz Funeral Home was the funeral, arranged the funeral, and there's the funeral director's signature, and they were based out of Carlisle. And this uh, certificate was filed looks like the 12th, and that would be the registrar's signature, which can't make out, and really not a big deal. There's really no need to have it other than just an extra piece of information that you could put down. And then we'll just go over to the medical side, and we see that he died July 9th, 1948 at 6:45 p.m. And doesn't appear that there was any sort of that he was under a physician's care, and we know he was 21. So, uh, what's this cause of death tell us then? Was it sudden? We'll have to see here. It looks, and this is where the handwriting gets a little dicey here. It's well, both these words seem to be acute. That looks to be dilation, and that's myocarditis. So one of the causes was acute myocarditis. Uh, I'm fairly positive that that's what that is. There's two T's there. That would be dilation. See, this is where and it looks like to be heart. Acute sudden of heart. So we would, it appears they died of some sort of heart issue, maybe a genetic disorder, something sudden, I would assume. Usually if it's a heart attack, it would say differently than this. So maybe he did have some sort of genetic heart issue. It's not too bad where you can't understand it. It could be clearer. But if you did not know, and we're still going to go through this anyhow, if we did not understand the handwriting, you can always use this code. This code is something I recently learned, and have really learned how it can benefit us in research. And it's called the ICD code, the International Classification of Disease. Basically, in layman's terms, it's medical billing. In all death certificates since 1893 worldwide have been uniform in this code, and it's been revised like 10 times. So you have to be careful when you look at this code. If you get the wrong year, it could be actually a totally different cause of death. So, and we'll go to it and look at it. So 93A, and we think it's something with the heart. So 93A, and go up here to a site that lists all the revisions. It's hard to find a site that has all the revisions. And here, this here, International Classification of Diseases. And we'll click on it, and we'll go to, you see all the different revisions I was talking about. And the last one was in 1990. So there were 10 revisions. It began in 1893. And in most cases, they didn't start keeping death certificates until after 1900. So that's probably why there's no, numbers here on this one. But after that, you see there is all the revisions, and they got the information. So he died in 1948, and we see that there was a revision in 1948, and we'll click on that. And as you see up here, it says International Classification. And here's the different list of diseases and causes of death. And as we go down, it was 93A. And I'm not seeing letters after the numbers here. That could be, let's see, there's 93. And there's no 93A, and that's definitely not what we had saw there. So let's go back, and I know this one. This was the second side of the revision, and again, I'm not seeing any numbers, seeing just the digits. 93. Yeah, it's totally different. And the only thing I could think of, let's go back to the year before before it was revised. That's that one. Oops, wrong one. 1938, 46, yeah, 48. Let's go to 1938 and see if that was in what year? 48. He died in July, so might not necessarily um, been in effect yet. You would think by July it would have been, but it it doesn't appear to. And you see the numbers. There's numbers beside or letters beside these, so that might be the case. It hadn't been implemented yet. Let's see, 93. Um, 93A. Yeah, that's what it appears to be. Because that's what we had thought. That's what it said there in the contributory side. And let's go to his acute myocarditis 93A. So that appears to be what happened there is that they, uh, for whatever reason, the revision hadn't taken effect yet in July of that year. So it reverts back to the fifth revision instead of the sixth. And so, like, and as you saw there, it's totally different than what it is in the 38 uh, revision. So, you have to be careful, or you can get the wrong diagnosis, and and write it down in your tree as being the wrong diagnosis yourself. And again, the we were able to read that part and could tell that that's probably what that was, and that code confirmed that that's what it was. So likely he died of some sort of onset of heart disease of some sort, and apparently it seemed to happen quick. And or maybe he did have a heart defect and possibly didn't know it either, or as well. So, but yeah, I'm glad we did that. That's interesting. Um, so not necessarily that the year that they died when a revision uh, did it take effect in that revision. So might want to keep that in mind as well. That was interesting. There's something that I didn't know, and I learned as we were doing it here. And then at the bottom, the doctor he signed it, and the date and his address, and so that's how you go through a death certificate. And it's interesting some of the things you can come up with, like in this instance here. You know, two separate residences, and we assume it was his wife. And why was his residence elsewhere? It may be something, you know, if you didn't know and you're researching, you might want to check and see if there was any sort of domestic issues. They were getting divorced, separated. It might say that in the obituary. And, don't know. I haven't researched it, so we just assume. But those are the type of things. And we assume that it's his wife because, so the towns of his parents weren't listed. But then uh, you would expect that if that was his mother, it would at least have her birthplace. So um, I would put my money that it was his wife who did the informing. And then arises this question, the RD1. So um, that's how it's done. And those are the issues that you can that can come up, and how you get through them. And this code can be very beneficial, as it was in this case. And you can learn about the revisions, and learn, if you can't read this, how that revision comes in handy. So I hope you enjoyed it. I know I enjoyed it, and I hope to be doing another one soon. Thank you.